maybe we should get started. So thank you very much, and yeah, so it's our pleasure to have Blake Barbeau. Do I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, you did. Right on.
Uh, aka CorrivalRhyme, to speak on ArchVis in virtual worlds. Thanks a lot.
Hey there. This is CorrivalRhyme. For those unknowing of me, I engage within the design fields of architecture, environmental and interior design, furniture and lighting, with a few contributions to games such as Dragon Adventures and Aim Blocks. I joined the Roblox platform in 2011, and after gaming for a while, I started getting into building in 2014. I've certainly had my fair share of notability as a modest and well-to-do developer, for being noticed and spotlighted for what I do and am capable of, to even create impacts that people would see day to day. The craft of building certainly has impacts within Roblox too, and for my line of work, buildings are not just that, but are places. When I began creating simple buildings way back when, over the years, my processes for creating them turned into more of a place. It's a place due to its surrounding environment. Buildings encompass various external factors that people interact with. A principle of architecture being the design of places like housing, skyscrapers, and other structures. It is why my brand is known as CorrivalRhyme Design, to encompass all aspects of design like environmental, furniture, lighting, and architecture itself. To slowly learn my ways through all these elements, I can better create these buildings with respect to what it is, moreover, when it's in an actual scene. The scene is a place. It involves surrounding elements that people too interact with. These elements can be connected to the building itself, or even be a partner to it. Every building needs a friend, from pathways, trees, gardens, terminals, and more. This gives us the essences of the experience that we know we would have out in the world, just like the essences of waiting at an airport or for coffee at the cafe. The sense of place and the people within it, all the things moving around and happening. Building in Roblox gives us an extension of that effect, to where we can imitate this nature to our own ideas without the real world constraint. The building that I have here in this place, for example, was made early on in my years of starting out. Being in college at the time, I took note of some of the buildings on campus that stood out, mainly due to the newer structures mixed in with the old, because it's an older campus, so there was newer construction at the time. The building that inspired this one presented a semi-brutalist themed, contemporary concrete and large glass windows feel. The portion of this building that ends as a raised structure is more or less very similar to the design of it. Most work and expression tends to stem from inspiration. So to have something to call our own, that feels like it was that prime display of fine construction. In addition, I want to note that initially I created this in 2017. At that time, my creative process didn't give any thought to what this could look like if placed somewhere, including having like a full envisioning. No care for the essence of the environment or greater levels of detail. I was more about getting something done and moving on to the next thing, and not so much taking my time on it. The interior was not sectioned off into separate independent exhibits. It was just one long, vast space. So when I started remastering old projects in 2021, I gave that consideration, that reflection, when redoing the work of this place during that year. Now, as given purpose through Meta Uni, where events will now be held. So, most notably, some of my work shown here are more recently created and incorporate refined and efficient methods and workflows I use to go about the creative process. Additionally, I have no firm naming scheme at this time to organize my work, but will be presenting them accordingly when my portfolio website is completed in the near future. Pacific Northwest theme residence, completed earlier in 2022 with focus on the Pacific Northwest themes of architecture, an emphasis on the rocky and concrete with wood two-tone blend of structure and aesthetic. This is the first build that I started using PBR in the process when it came out of beta. As you can see, for the background, I extensively used and painted various nature assets, some I created and some used from the community, and was fairly taxing for my system, but I managed all right. Courtyard remastering, being a remastered version of a project from 2019. Nowadays, I have a liking to environmental and landscaping scenes, but haven't explored it as much as I'd like to for buildings, and that's more or less due to the constraints of Roblox has for making organic shapes without becoming too off-putting. Mid-rise clothing store, more realistic take on a high-traffic clothing store for a major brand. I worked on this at a time when clothing stores were at their prime for business ventures on Roblox. Most stores I would see in the Roblox Twitter community, or RTC, were smaller in size. So I wanted to imagine something that has more business, customers, and had a city feel to it. Also remastered from 2019. Amazon inspired offices. This project demonstrates entirely my process from old to new. This one specifically from 2018 to 2021, breathing new life into unfinished work and ultimately making it a prime highlight for a portfolio. Before was a simple and more blank and plain tower with no attention to surrounding environment to give it character and a sense of completion. Its level of detail didn't bring it to be fully envisioned and alive. This one I had started back in 2018, around the time I had done an urban hike through Seattle, with part of that experience looking at the recently constructed Amazon HQ and offices, with some even still going on today, and was inspired by the construction to make something similar. Being in college at the time, I submitted the first version of this project into their annual art magazine and actually got put into it. Looking back on it, I wish I could have been better at what I do sooner, because I think it would have had more value at the time when compared to other students who work in the magazine. So, over the years, I've been asked about why I do all this technical and articulate work within Roblox and not do something greater, such as using Unreal Engine. And ultimately, it boils down to growing up on the platform, recognizing it for intuitiveness and its own possibilities and opportunities, and having a community growing up with. I simply stuck with it, and yes, I can have better features and superior results, such as lighting engines and physics, but really, Roblox is progressing towards the likeness of that level. I don't mind too much on the fact that I can port a project over there and have an improved rendering several times over. I will add that some things I seek to do on those engines are also not fully realized. Some of the methods I require, general features and niche applications, are not quite built in as they remain in development and in coordination with the community's demands there. With that in mind, I found that this is an opportunity to contribute more to Roblox with plugins and workflows, and so in the near future, I'm hoping to have a team together to create something vast and impactful within CorrivalRhyme design. Had I been in other programs and communities too, I think I wouldn't have gotten into that at all. What even is the purpose of architecture at all in the metaverse, being a universe without constraints? Design's constraints differ there, such as many players in a server in respect to potential lag, compared to real-world constraints like budget, square footage, and the dynamic of the topography that the place is on, because we can control them a whole lot more. It's as simple as making it a challenge in itself, or it could act as practice to actually engage in the architectural field. But why bother building at all? It could be the same reasoning as to why we watch cinema, for example. A film is a temporary escape from society's uncertainty and grip, a half measure. A film is an escape from the reality that offers a false sense of freedom and longing, and so ArchVis in virtual worlds is not at all that different. The process of designing and building is the point of it. Building does exist because we want to have some extension of the real world that we can express towards, to still have the essences of what it is to be alive, out in the world, exploring, experiencing, and doing, and of course, role-playing. To do things we can't physically do, so this gives us a playful, fantastical, childlike energy we don't get out in the world, nor in the same way in today's day and age. I, for one, grew up building tree forts, playing with Legos, drawing, and role-playing around in the forest, and just being outside all the time. What I engage in doing on Roblox and seek to do in the future can instill that energy back to me where not possible in the current societal dynamic, like working to pay bills. While I can design and build the residence of my dreams, I still want to give it constraint and tension, because that is where all the interesting things happen. Constraint drives creativity, and uniqueness concentrates attention. I aspire for greatness in this sense. A prime example of why the metaverse exists is to experience fantasies we imagine as kids. We can do that with building worlds and the objects within them to form a game, experience, or showcase. This leads to the nature of role-playing and to reiterate, escape from our rather grim reality that we know so well of society's nature. I believe I do it because it's fun too. I'm constantly looking back at my work because I believe it to be pleasing to look at in an almost timeless manner. Growing up on the platform is an interesting bond, and so having all this fun over the years just kind of makes sense. I have people that can critique my work and enjoy my work. That doesn't feel like there's restriction of the essence of the environment feeling off. To top it off, I think it is nice to simply put a creation to a place, publish it, and then play it with friends and others in the community. Doing these things in Roblox gives me opportunities I never thought I would have before on other platforms. I enjoy receiving some of the attention because it pushes me to keep producing and sharing what I have going for me so that others may continue to be inspired. I enjoy responses to my work and others doing similar things to my likeness. As a community, I aspire for being almost a role model in building and sharing my craft. As mentioned earlier, other work I believe to be fundamental ultimately leads to being well diversified, because this can be attributed to comfort zones. It's good to explore more than just doing one particular trade or skill or whatever it may be. CorrivalRhyme design represents this. Rather than just create some structure, I seek to give it character now too, with greater detail in recent years. That is when I deem it a finished product. Then, in the instance of being applied to a game or city-like scene, it's more complete and requires less effort for integration to its farther and environmental surroundings. It gives me greater worldview and capability, and even confidence, to tend to what my next imagining might be or client's needs, were it to be a commission. Secondly, it's better to take time on one's craft and really get in all the hard work and detailing on a project. I've learned to care less on others' opinions and how I go about something, and care more about myself and how I feel about doing it. The project looks good if the process felt good. It needs to be a kind of ballet. I've talked about this before in my article about precision building on Medium, with the keyword being flow. Flow is the stream of energy, and in the creative process, if you can continue on without too much of, I suppose, setbacks and constant reiteration, you probably have a great way of making it happen. To just have the means to keep going and progressing in the sequence and get that final creation, and of course, feel great about it. Another aspect is through realizations and reflections we make as we tread along with our methods to craft and workflows. The past few years for me has been a focus on improving how I build, and so I applied this realization to past projects. Building since 2014 makes for a long list of projects, and since 2021 I have not only introduced new work, but fully envisioned older work as well. Good feelings sprang from this, such as fulfillment and that the work done has been worthwhile, with my portfolio more solidified. To demonstrate what I am capable of and make these older, less valuable projects something worth having even today. I think it's also fundamental to reflect. I'm constantly look forward to the next challenge and look back to see how far I've come and how much I can improve on. One of the things I would get told often, and this was in my earlier days, was that all I would do was copy and paste. During a time of making random, simple skyscrapers with no real form or detail level, people would think that I was doing the things the easy way, with putting together some parts to make a floor and just duplicating it over and over into the sky. I go over this sometime later, and now nobody says that now, which is rewarding to me that I got over doing the same thing repeatedly. I feel great that each project I work on now is different and has its own unique challenges. I've also found that there is always something in my work that is somehow incorrect, but natural. like parts off by a fraction of a stud in a build, or something becomes asymmetrical or changes in certain patterns that the build has, which then just becomes the so annoying little thing to resolve but never seemingly can be. I found this to be rather comical and interesting, and realized that nature can find a way to creep into the essence of creation. Everyday people just don't see what the entire process is, so creation is not ultimately perfect, but what is the final form of a creation that instills feeling to us and elicits our human response with incredible emotional content. I think long term, while most of my work probably won't go anywhere besides a few commissions and purchases, instead I like to think that this is my reputation. And when people ask about what I do, I can show them an entire life's work of fulfillment and expression and energy that I still have and instill into this work, and more so my drive to make things like these where I couldn't in the real world. I've made another observation, in the sense I'm aware I'm a hidden gem. I feel like the hidden gem most are unknowing of, but recognize the value within. In my work, I try to be fairly realistic, and normally this means I like to be critical. I also like to think that I am just doing exactly that, of the reasoning building exists in the metaverse in its entirety, to be going the furthest lengths and deepest depths of exploration, from adding bathrooms that are, of course, obsolete in the metaverse, to load-bearing support columns. I want to have at least a baseline understanding of how things function being applied in the real world, but not so much that I'm factoring elements like seismic and wind force application. I'll leave that to the civil engineers. The metaverse alone does not quite call for this in most aspects of experience, at least not yet. For those that engage in ArchVis, which are few and far between, I think should get a little more credit for their craft. In addition, more credibility, or rather, the authenticity that one's creativity instills into the work, and where applicable, more compensation if it commissioned. With all that it takes to build the right ways in the metaverse, most just don't see that part of the creative process. To be seeing only the end result and not seeing behind the scenes where the emotional drive to work perspectives are. If somebody evolves better and better, of course, that's going to be a good thing in their personal promise of progress. But this is where they have more potential of energy, that drive and willpower to keep going, and hopefully have that flow as I talked about earlier. And I think more of that flow that is had, the more we remote it from emotional things. And so context creates content, and hopefully the creations we all make with incredible emotional content. As humanity continues on in the promise of progress and uncertainty, we will also continue to rise, evolve, and advance. For the future of ArchVis, and moreover building in virtual worlds and ultimately the metaverse, we will continue to progress in complexity, presentation, and power that has lasting effects on us. I think we will see more applications for professional work as the technology in Roblox progresses. We may see something similar on par to the niche but growing era of augmented reality applications. I know I've seen clips on Instagram from engineering and architecture accounts, videos presenting augmented reality for architectural visualization to merge the workflows of visualizing and presenting a project. I think we will see advancements to methods of building, such as plugins utilized in workflows, the creative process behind building things, and how we present through various methods, such as the camera in Roblox Studio. I briefly mentioned earlier how some things in the creative process just don't quite exist yet, like certain plugins for niche applications, or like how to go about something the right way that requires specificity. Sometimes you just have to find solutions yourself when there is none out there. In the near future, I'm looking to create something new and greater under my CorrivalRhyme design brand that contributes to the community to help with that. Mostly just various plugins, but will cover more aspects than just building and how to build the right ways. Whatever the processes may be, from just building, actual buildings, and more so places, this aspect of living is a part of us. We are wired to make stuff, and will remain even in the metaverse, just with more creative freedom. It is the sandbox extension of the real world, and exploring what the future holds with greater than ever before as we simplify the creative process, means, and time it takes to get there, with an increase in the complexities of what we experience to become sometimes more than what is seen in the real world. If interested in exploring what I do in my presence on Roblox, my Twitter is my alias, CorrivalRhyme, and very soon we'll be unveiling my portfolio website, which I will announce on Twitter. Thank you, folks. I will now open for Q&A.
Thanks a lot. That was great. I really appreciate it. I have a bunch of questions. Others should chime in with their questions either in the chat or in voice chat. Yeah, so many things from what you said I want to pick up on and ask you about. Maybe the first one is, so I don't know if you know, Stuart Brand has a book called How Buildings Learn, that's sort of about how buildings adapt over time and change, and how the what's his phrase, architects can both be artists of space but also artists of time. So I wonder if you have any thoughts about how in the future of architecture in virtual worlds, what that might look like. I mean, obviously we've modified this building slightly already, in various tiny ways, but yeah, do you have any, maybe you think that's a bad thing and your original vision should stand for all time, and I could understand that for sure, but I wonder if you have any thoughts about long term, if buildings like this are used for years and years, what it might look like for them to adapt, and how you feel about that.
Well, it's people, isn't it? I mean, over time, we're always changing. I mean, our human nature is to change things, and we're always going about things, whether it's positive or negative. It's going to change, and that's okay. I mean, we can intend for the design of something to just stand, but we should have that understanding that it's going to change over time, because after all, time is the fourth dimension, and time changes us. We're changing with time. We have to flow with the river no matter what. So I think even if this building alone was to change, I think that makes sense, because it's not like the building was designed to fit a current need. It's going to be fitting needs over time, and naturally those needs are going to change. So I think if the building needs to change to some extent to meet those needs, then so be it.
And a related question, yeah, one thing you said that I'm very interested in was this comment about nature creeping into things. And the way you said it made it sound like sometimes you feel that it's creeping in a way you would rather it doesn't, because it's like a mistake. But then you maybe also come to like the mistakes, or what's your... Yeah, could you dig into
It's
that
interesting. It's interesting. It depends, actually. Depending on what I'm working on. Normally, I'd want to be exact and perfect, especially if you're meeting the needs of certain dimensions that the real world it would apply to. But sometimes it's a headache, sometimes it's annoying, but sometimes it can be fascinating how it just happens. No matter how perfect, no matter how calculated the process that you have going about the design or building, it's here there. It's depends on what you're working on. There was a couple instances with this building where I think it was on the angled parts, so the parts that go up and down, they would be off a couple degrees somehow, and no matter what I did, I would align on one corner, and then I would go back to the other corner, and it would just not add up at all, no matter what I did. So, I mean, in a case like this, it's a geometric shape, so naturally I want to follow a geometric principle in a sense. So with the design of this building, it was more of a headache than something I was content with.
Yeah, makes sense.
But I find it interesting.
Yeah, it's a topic we discuss a fair bit here at Meta Uni, which is one of the great things about the real world is that it surprises you, right? You come around a corner and there's a tree that's doing something maybe you haven't been to that spot in a year, and there's something growing there that isn't what you expected, or it's changed color, and that's really delightful. Virtual worlds tend to be less surprising and more intentional, and that's fine, right? And many beautiful things are
Yep.
intentional, but there's also like a missing source of inspiration and joy in virtual worlds maybe right now, which is that they maybe don't continue to surprise you on a regular basis. So that's what nature does. So yeah, I guess a part of the design that doesn't quite work is a kind of surprise. But
The law of surprise.
mm,
Another example would be that, like, in the art form of origami, which is paper folding, somehow, if let's say you're folding an object that's geometric in nature, just because it's the real world and nothing's perfect, if you're folding the paper a certain way at certain angles and achieving certain forms to make a geometric shape, just because of the nature of the paper alone, wants to change when you're folding that thing. So in origami, there's never the same model twice usually, and as you're folding the paper, it's just because of the thickness of the paper or the strength of the paper, it'll gradually change as you fold the model. And so no matter how calculated the first fold is to a model and to the end of completion, somehow you'll have imperfections, and that's nature creeping in. But because paper folding has a more natural sense and therapeutic essence to it, it kind of makes sense. And I feel like that might be a positive most of the time.
oh, there's a commission. Can you make a building for us that starts out as a big piece of paper and then while we're talking folds itself into architecture?
I can see that, yeah.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Yeah, that's a very beautiful analogy. I hadn't thought about that. You've distinguished ArchVis or ArchVis from architecture. Can you explain? I think I know what those terms mean, but can you explain what the difference is and why it's important?
Like the difference of ArchVis to...
Well, I mean, you're making rather deep comments about how you relate to architecture and what it means and how it fits into virtual worlds. But ArchVis seems to me like a very technical term that just refers to...
Agreed. It's just a term that people dub to represent the field, which is, like in the real world, ArchVis people, they're just the ones that visualize a project that someone might have needed for visualization purposes and not entirely meant to be like a final result. So ArchVis and virtual worlds wouldn't be too much different, except with virtual worlds, you're not really looking for real world principles, but more so just for the look and feel. Maybe to just kind of trick people into thinking it's going to be the same thing, but in the real world, it's a real trade, it's a real craft that's going on, big money, and then in here it's a more simple form, I think, at least for now.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me with ArchVis, I'm kind of stuck in between. Yeah, I do get commission work, I do have clientele, but in the real world, it's like a licensed architect or anything, at least not yet. I intended for school for that, but not right now. I think I see myself as like an in-between between the less serious and more playful side, like being in Roblox, making stuff for games and showcases and other experiences, and then between actual things like stuff for people's homes or a business or something in the city,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, also I'd like to comment about how the process of creating these things is a big part of what you find attractive about it, and the way in which it takes you back to the childlike energy of building temporary or semi-permanent structures that are intended largely just as a component of play. And that's obviously to some extent what we're doing here as well. It's maybe sometimes a rather serious form of play, but very much what we're here to do is a kind of play. So I like that way of thinking about building these kinds of places.
Yeah, like a good definition of architecture alone is designing places that people come to work, live, and play in. And a principle of being for us humans in this world is exactly that. If you look back to like the Stone Age, Mesopotamia, people were doing the same thing. You could have a hut made of sand and straw, and the children of the village would come to play in or gather. And it still applies today. You have kids building tree forts in the forest or playing around with Legos and using their imagination to what end and getting the same effect.
So here's a question about the purpose of architecture in virtual worlds, which you did talk about a bit. So in the real world, physical world rather, buildings do many things. They protect us from the elements, they regulate temperature, they provide affordances like chairs and PowerPoints and so on. They also drive our attention and behavior in certain ways. The latter things, I guess, still work in a virtual world, so your buildings could draw attention to certain things if they're placed in strategic locations. They could encourage certain kinds of behavior, like jumping off the roof or whatever. But what do you... as you've built these places and spent a lot of time and poured a lot of passion into them, how has it changed how you think about... I mean, it's not just about visualization, right? So what do you hope people do with these places or get out of them?
It could be like going to an art exhibit and studying the piece, learning more about the piece, learning about the artist that made the piece. It can be anything to like that. If it's in an actual place that's public, then of course it's going to be about going there, moving around in it, experiencing it, doing things with people in it. But it's here there as well. I think people can do as they please. I mean, people don't have to look at it at all. But for me, it's about making something with incredible emotional content and putting it out in the world, sharing it.
Cool. Yeah, I'm curious about where you're going next with landscape, and I take your point that it's hard to do anything with landscape in Roblox. I think the one part of the design of this building that unfortunately we took out were the trees, just because there were many polygons. So the trees we have here are very rudimentary. They're like the standard Roblox asset set. And in general, maybe there aren't so many beautiful trees that are performant around, and it's a hard job to make a great garden or a landscape. But assuming that situation improves a bit, I'm interested in your thoughts on how to bring more of the outside in or break up the buildings. So one of the things we wanted to get away from initially at MediUni was the idea that people have when they think about having classes in a virtual world. They build a school, they build seats, they put people in the seats, they put a blackboard in the front of the room, and they're all squished into this room, which it's fine, but there's so much more potential in a virtual world if you use it tastefully to make the experience more profound, more interesting, more engaging. And we've done a pretty good job of that, I think, outdoors. But I really think that there's a lot of scope for using buildings like the amazing things you make, bring that into the picture in the right way. And yeah, I'm interested in your thoughts on like somewhere in between. So this is a building, it stands on its own. It's right now not really incorporated into the garden you can see outside here. But I wonder if you have thoughts about the right way to go about bringing the landscape in, or taking parts of the building out, or how are you thinking about this?
Well, it's about balance, right? I mean, if you have an educational purpose for some like a building like this, I mean, it's all about balance. You have to make sure that, people are still going to be in the place with the purpose that they were supposed to be, like learning or engaging with the subject matter. You just have to balance from foreground to background. Yes, you can have an enclosed space like a classroom. You could do it in a forest, but it's all about how much you balance the elements required for intended purpose and need to the background filler elements that aren't ultimately necessary, but what give us the extension of the feelingness that we have in the physical world.
Why does it feel good to be inside a building looking out? I like it. I like standing in here looking out the window. Why do I like it so much? I know this is like a hard question, but I think you know what I mean, right? Like, why do I get a kick out of this?
It's energy, man. It's energy. I mean, a big, vast building like this, you walk around it, you see, you're to scale with it almost. You feel its power and what it's presenting and the elements within. And when you walk in, it kind of just encompasses you entirely, right? So when you're looking out into the world, you're almost like a part of the building. You're a part of that energy. The energy that I instilled with incredible emotional content, which we then get out of it from being in the building, from being around the building with people.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. All the stuff in your precision building blog post, I think I read it before I'd been inside this building, but I read it again afterwards, and it was
right on.
Every line of it I could feel in this place. So I think what you say is, yeah, I mean, it's very much like mathematics, what we do, right? When you're reading some other people's mathematics, you're inhabiting a mental construct that they built, and you can't tell every detail why it is the way it is, but you can sense that somebody gave a shit about that idea and that mental construct, and you can derive some energy from being in that world that they made for you. And I think it's very much the same in this building. I don't understand half of what went into it, but I can feel that you really sweated over it. It makes a big difference. Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah.
Cool. Does anybody else have questions? Chad, anything you want to ask Corrival? I guess we'll wrap up shortly.
Typing intensifies.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, there's one more thing I wanted to ask. Yeah, the idea of long time. So I think this is quite interesting, and the relationship people like yourself have to Roblox, where it's part of your life. You've been here a long time, and that's partly why you're motivated to build here, even though I imagine not everybody gets it or sees building in Roblox, especially things like this, as maybe it seems a bit odd to them. I know certainly people tilt their heads a little bit when they hear about MetaUni. So I'm interested in, are there architectural elements in games you've been playing for a long time that you feel a sense of familiarity in when you go back to visit them? Maybe things you've built, or maybe things other people have built that have just been part of your life for all these years, in a way that real buildings kind of grow on you, right? They're a part of your life because you grew up in them, or you sort of had formative moments in them. Are there any elements of architecture in Roblox that have a similar role in your life?
Sometimes I'll scroll on social media like Twitter, and I'll see, like, on the Roblox dev hashtag, I'll see people that sometimes I'll see it, a creation that kind of has a likeness to mine, inspired by me or not. I think sometimes I get a little giddy about it, and it feels good that I'm not the only one most of the time. Like, I'm not some entire total hidden gem. It's interesting, yeah. In other aspects outside of Roblox, I mean, of course, there's so many buildings out in the world nowadays. There's millions of them. There's thousands of cities, millions of buildings, and I follow all kinds of architecture accounts on Instagram and look at Google imagery and follow all kinds of various photography accounts. And sometimes as I scroll around, it's I feel like it's more entitled to energy. If what I'm seeing, the energy that I resonate from is at least somehow similar, like I sense the similarity of the energy that what I'm seeing is resonating, then I connect with it and I save it. I look at it again over and over. I get inspired from it, and then I make something like that, almost like that energy.